Today's daf is Kaf Gimel in Yoma. We're going to start on Kaf Bet, Amud Bet, last line. There was an interesting discussion in the preceding daf about Shaul HaMelech and the issue of standing up for your honor when you're in a position of power. So that talked about Shaul and how one of the mistakes that he made was he didn't enforce his own kavod, his own honor, when it was compromised, and therefore he undermined his authority. Va'amar Rabbi Yochanan, we said, read the last line of that daf. Va'amar Rabbi Yochanan mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yehotzadak, that Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yehotzadak, Kol Talmid Chacham she'eno nokem v'noter kenachash, any Talmid Chacham who doesn't take revenge and bear grudges like a snake, ain't no Talmid Chacham. He's not a Talmid Chacham. He's not a scholar. You have to be zealous for defending your kavod. That's what it's saying. Like Shaul failed to defend his kavod, the Talmid Chacham has to defend his kavod because it's kavod Torah, not because he personally should be a vengeful, mean guy, but because it's if he allows people to walk all over him, he loses the honor of the Torah. So, but does it not say in the pasuk lo tikom velo titoret bnei amecha? Right? It says that you're not supposed to take revenge, and you're not supposed to bear grudges against your fellow Jews. So how could you say that the Talmid Chacham is going to be nokem v'noter? It sounds like he's violating the Torah. The Torah says you're not supposed to do that. So the Gemara answers that that's talking about money. In other words, if there's a financial issue, you shouldn't take revenge. What's the example of that? Titania, as we learned in a Braita, Ezohi nekima, Ezohi netira. What is the definition of nekima, of revenge, and netira, bearing a grudge? Amarlo, he said to him, Hashileni magalcha. If his friend says to him, or you said to your friend, please lend me a tool, right? You need a certain tool for working in the garden or working in the field. And Amar lo lav, he said, no, I'm not going to lend it to you. I don't want to lend you it. The Amar lo, so the Machar Amar lo. So the next day, the same guy who refused to lend his garden tool to the first guy comes and asks him to borrow something. Right? So that's the worst situation. You asked somebody asked you for something, you said no. Now you have to ask them for something. Okay, now he comes back, he has to ask him for something. He says, Hashileni kardumcha, please give me your shovel. So Amar lo, Eini mashilcha kederech shelo yishaltani. He says, just like you didn't lend me, I'm not going to lend you. Zohi nekima, that's the definition of revenge. In other words, it's in objects. Okay, if somebody, you refuse to lend you something, you can refuse to lend them. That's nekima. That's called taking revenge. You're not allowed to do that. Ve'ezohi netira, what's called bearing a grudge? Amar le, he said to him, Hashileni kardumcha. He asked him to borrow a shovel. Amar le lo, he said no. Lemachar Amar le hashileni chalukcha. The next day he comes and asks him to borrow a shirt. Amar lo, he says, Helech, take it. So in other words, in the first case, he refuses to give him what he asks for because he says, you didn't lend me what I asked for, so I'm not going to lend you what you asked for. Fair is fair, right? Second time, but you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to do that. Or you have to. It's asur. It's against the Torah. It's describing what are you not allowed to do. You're not. When it says don't take revenge, it means if somebody didn't lend you something, you can't now discriminate against them. You're not allowed to. What's nitira? Nitira means that you ask the guy to lend you something. He said no. Then he comes to lend you to borrow something, and you lend it to him, but you say, I am not like you. You are not nice. I'm nice. I'm going to show you how nice I am by doing it. Why? Because it shows that it's still bothering you, right? It's still in your heart because you're still holding it against him. Even though you didn't punish him by not lending him the item, you still remind him what he did, so it's still bothering you. You give it to him out of spite. Here, take it. I'm a nice guy, you're a bad guy, because you wouldn't lend me what I asked. So what does that show you? That shows you that we're dealing here with objects. And whereas when we talk about the Talmid Chacham being nokem v'noter kenachash, it's talking about a situation where he's disrespected, not where his objects are denied to him, not where somebody refused to lend him something, now he can refuse to lend them something. That's not what it's talking about. It's talking about where his honor personally was attacked. That's a different story, says the Gemara. V'tzara digufalo. Are you saying that the idea of not taking revenge is restricted only to objects of monetary value. It doesn't include personal insult, personal attacks. It does. Those who are insulted but don't respond back. They hear their disgrace from others, but they don't respond in kind. They do the mitzvot from love, and they celebrate when they suffer. In other words, any suffering that God gives to them, they say, you know what, it's going to make me better. It's going to make me closer to God. It's going to improve me. Whatever the suffering is, I'm going to grow from it. Those people, Alehena Katuv Omer, about such people it says, Ve'oavav ketzet hashemesh b'gvurato, that those who love Hashem are like the sun coming out in their strength. In other words, they're always getting stronger. Just like the sun rises and it gets stronger and stronger and stronger, this person's always rising, because anything that life deals them, they take it in stride, and they grow from it, and they don't allow other people insulting them, bothering them, frustrating them, whatever, to hold them back. So what do you see from that? You see that it's considered a much better quality not to respond, even when somebody insults you. So nikima, in other words, not taking revenge, is not only when somebody refuses to lend you something that you refuse to lend to them. It's also when somebody insults you, not responding. So how can you say that Talmid Chacham is supposed to be nokem venoter kenachash? How is he going to be taking revenge? Any revenge, he shouldn't take revenge if the person refused to lend him something. He shouldn't take revenge if the person insults him, because it says that tzaddik doesn't take revenge, even if someone insults him. So what does it mean? So the Gemara says, Le'olam denaket le belibe. What it means is that he keeps it in his heart. Rashi says, that it doesn't mean that the Talmid Chacham is going to go out and take revenge against this other person. What it means is that he will, if he sees it happening, he's not going to intervene. In other words, if he sees that this guy who's been giving him a hard time is in trouble, he's not going to go help him. He'll let it happen. If somebody else comes after him, he said, listen, I'm not going to get involved. So he remembers what the person did to him, and he allows justice to take its course. That's what the Gemara says. Now, Amar Rava, but doesn't Rava say, Kol ha'ma'avir al midotav ma'avirin lo al kol pisha'av? Doesn't Rava say that anybody who is ma'avir al midotav, meaning he lets things go, he doesn't insist on having his just, what he deserves, what he's entitled to. He lets things go. That person, Hashem forgives him for everything. In other words, what does that mean? A Talmid Chacham, who's supposed to be a great tzaddik, should just forgive and forget. Because it says, Kol ma'avir al midotav. If a person forgives and forgets, he's going to be blessed. So the Gemara says, what it means is when the person who wronged you apologizes, you let it go. It doesn't mean if somebody did bad to you, you have to just say, I'm going to let him, somebody broke in my house and stole my stuff, I'm not going to press charges. Why? Why not? He didn't repent. Now if somebody insults you and they come to you and they say, I'm very sorry I insulted you, you should immediately let it go. But it doesn't mean that you see a bad guy who's out to get you all the time, that you should just pretend he's a nice guy. That's being foolish, right? So that's what the Gemara says. The Talmid Chacham is going to keep it in his heart, meaning that if he sees that justice is going to be done against this person, he doesn't intervene. What if that person came and apologized to him? Then he would let it go, of course. But we're talking about where the person didn't apologize to him. So now we go back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah was talking about the pais. The pais is the lottery that was done to apportion the various parts of the service to the Kohanim. And the first thing that they would apportion was the Tirumat Hadeshin. The removing of some of the ashes of the. Now there were two parts of this service that we're going to learn about. One is that they would take some of the ash off of the Mizbeach every day and put it next to the Mizbeach. When that got really big, the pile next to the Mizbeach got really big, then they would have what's called Hotza'at Hadeshin. They would take out the tapuach, it was called. They would take out this big apple of ashes that had grown outside of the Beit HaMikdash. So Tirumat Hadeshin is the daily thing, that they would take a scoop of whatever the ashes were from the previous day and put them in the pile. But Hotza'at Hadeshin is when they would take that pile out completely, which didn't happen every day. That only happened occasionally. We're going to see more about this as we go forward. But it said that they would make a lottery. In the beginning, they used to have a race up to the top of the kevish, up to the top of the mizbeach, and whoever would get close to the top first would win. Then they saw people were coming to push each other and stab each other and do all kinds of other bad things. So they decided, you know what, this is not a good idea. Let's just do a lottery from now on. That was what was discussed a little bit in yesterday's daf, and it's going to continue now. It says that they would put out one finger or two fingers. So what they would do is they would put all the kohanim in a circle, and they would take the hat off of one of the kohanim and start with him. And a number would be chosen. Let's say 95 or whatever. And then everyone would put their finger out, and you would count fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4. And whoever was 95, he would win. Okay? So they would start from somewhere, and they would count around the circle. So it said they could put achat or shtayim. They could put one or two fingers out. So hashta shtayim motziin achat mibaya. Now, if the person can put out two fingers, obviously he can put one. Right? Why is it telling you can put one or two fingers? So what Amar Rav Chisda says, lo kashya kan bebari kan b'chola. One is talking about a healthy person, one's talking about a sick person. Because it's hard sometimes for a weak person to extend just one finger. They need to stick out two fingers. So for a regular person, they're only allowed to put one finger. For a person that it's hard for them to stick out only one finger, they can put two. But they're still only counted as one. As we learned in the Braita, as we learned in the Braita here, it says they can put one that where it's going to be an objection from the Braita. The Braita says that they can put one. Okay, shtaim in motziin, they can't put out two. Right, this is what we just learned. That when the person is healthy, they can put out one. When they're unhealthy, they can put out two. Right? והיחידין מוציאין שתיים ואין מונין להן אלא אחת. So the yachidim, those who are ill, that they can't sit with everyone else, they're lying down, they're sitting down, they're not feeling well, they can put out two fingers. Why do they put out two fingers? Because it's difficult for them to put out only one finger. They can't stretch out only one finger. However, ve'en monin lahen ela achat.
Automatically disqualified? Because
not necessarily if they're well enough to serve. I guess they're just not feeling so great. They're old, maybe. So, but it says that but they only count it as one. Okay? So it's not like you get to count two. If the number is 95, we don't count you for 1, 2, 3. We don't do it like that. Each person is still one, but they counted the fingers. Okay? Is that really true? That we only count one? Ve'atanya, we learned in a Braita. In other words, the previous Braita was really proving the previous statement. It was really proving that the distinction between one finger and two fingers is between the healthy and the sick. Right? But that raised another problem, which is, do we really only count them as one when they stick out two fingers? We still count them only as one? Ve'atanya, we learned in a Braita, because usually ve'atanya means an objection. There it was a proof. Now it's an objection. Ve'atanya, we learned in another Braita, En motzin lo shalish velo gudal. You don't stick out your middle finger or your thumb. Nipnei ramaim, because of the tricksters. Ve'im motzi shalish monin lo gudal in monin lo. If he stuck out his middle finger, we can count it. He wasn't supposed to, but we could still count it. But if he stuck out his thumb, we don't count it. Velo od ela sheloke min hamimune bepakia. Not only that, but he gets smacked with a whip by the guy who was in charge. In other words, that's considered really bad. Now, what's the reason why? So if we look at Rashi, he says, why were you not allowed to put out the middle finger or the thumb? Because the point was that you might be able to make it look like you were two different people. You would stick out your thumb and your finger like this. You wanted to get counted for two. So if you put your hand like this, we count, 1, 2. He didn't realize it's from the same person, right? With the middle finger, you could do that also with the middle and the pinky. Let's say do this. Right? But it's a little bit harder to do that. So since it's a little harder to do that, if he put out his middle finger, we don't disqualify him completely because it's not as good of a strategy. Okay, but if he used his thumb, not only do we not count him as two, we don't count him as anything. We remove him from the group. He gets disqualified for trying to cheat by using his thumb, so he could do this and count as two. When he saw the number was getting close, he wanted to be able to win. So therefore we said, you know what, you're out and you get whipped with the pakia, with the whip of the mimuneh, of the guy who was in charge. So it says, what does it mean that we count him? So the question is, it says that if you stick out your middle finger, we count it. So that would seem to imply that even if you put two fingers, you did this, that we would count them as two, because it says we count it. No, the Gemara says, no, still, it means that, it still means nami achat. It still means that only one. So in other words, it's not that we never count you as more than one. No matter how many fingers you stick out, we always count you as one. It's just that if you stuck out your thumb, we say you're disqualified for trying to cheat. If you stuck out your middle finger, we say we're still going to just count you as one, even though you shouldn't have stuck out the middle finger. You should have only stuck out the pointer finger. Unless you're sick. A sick person is allowed to stick out too. Right, we learned that already. But not, even they can't use the thumb. So my pakia, what's the pakia? Amar of madra. Madra, it means a whip. Okay? And my madra, amar of papa, mitarka de teyaya de pasikreshe. It means that it's the straps of the Yishmaelim. Okay? In other words, the Arabs would use a certain type of strap to whip their horses. It was broken on the end. The pasik reshe. So Rashi says the kach kuruya pikiya. That's why it's called broken. It's not thick on its end, but it's broken into pieces. So if you look at it would be like a strap of leather, but at the end it's sliced into different ends. So it's got 3 ends to it instead of 1 when you whip the person. So that was why that's what it is. Amar Abaye says, originally I thought that when it says in the Mishnah Masechet Shkalim that Ben Bevai was in charge of the pakia, Amina Petilta. I thought that pakia meant Petilta, it meant the wicks for the Beit HaMikdash. Kedetnan, as we learned, because we said from the worn out clothes of the Kohanim, hem yenehen, and from their hem yenehen is their belts. Mehen hayu mafki'in. This is what they would remove. They would take the cloth. They would take the fabric from the worn out garments and the belts of the Kohanim. Uvehen hayu madlikin, and they would use them for wicks in the candles of the menorah. Okay? So now though that I see in this Braita, in other words, originally Abaye said that when I read that Mishnah Masechet Shekalim that we learned not long ago, that said which Kohen was in charge of the pakia, I thought pakia meant wicks, because we learned in the Mishnah, I believe it's in Masechet Sukkah, we learned over there that the way that they would make it brings it as Sukkah and also in Masechet Shabbat, that they would make out of the old belts and clothes of the Kohanim, mafki'in. They would remove the fabric and they would make it into petilot. They would make it into wicks. So he thought pakia meant wicks. He says, but now I see pakia means whip, not wick with a K, whip with a P. Okay. So now I realize that Ben Bevai, he wasn't in charge of making wicks or in charge of the wicks. He was actually in charge of whipping the Kohanim who were misbehaving and trying to cheat. Okay? So now, so the Mishnah told a story about 2 guys that once were racing up to the top to be zochim. They wanted to have the opportunity to do Terumat HaDeshe in the first service of the day, and one pushed the other off of the ramp, and he broke his foot. So then they said, you know what? No more racing. From now on, we're just going to do a lottery for this. The Gemara in the previous daf discussed why they originally did it by race instead of by lottery. But anyway, lottery became the deal. Tanu Rabbanan, we learned in another Braita or Tosefta says Maseh b'shnei kohanim shahayu shnehen shavin. This is actually a very famous Tosefta. There were 2 kohanim who were running. They were shavin, veratzin ve'olin bakevesh. They were equal. In other words, they were running up the ramp and they were equally matched as runners. Kadam echad mehen letoch 4 amot shel havero. One got within the 4 amot of his friend. In other words, he got close to him. Natal sakin ve'takalo b'libo. He took a knife and he stuck it in his heart. In other words, he killed him. In other words, he saw that he was going to lose the race. The other guy was coming, too close. He saw that he didn't want to lose. So what did he do? He took the knife and he killed him. Stuck it in his heart. It's crazy.
Well, the Kohanim to go with the knife.
I guess so. These are Moroccan Kohanim. Yeah, that must be it. Rabbi Tzadok. So Amad Rabbi Tzadok stood up. Al Ma'alot Ulam. He stood up on the stairs of the antechamber of the Ulam. And Rashi mentions that in Josephus it talks about all these different sort of areas that on Har Habayit on the Temple Mount that Herod built. All kinds of different ulamot, all kinds of different sections and areas that were elevated. So he stood up on this elevated area, and he said, Ve'amar achenu beit Yisrael, our brothers, the house of Israel. Shim'u, listen. Harei Omer, it says, Ki yimatzeh halal b'adama v'yatzu'u zekenecha v'shofetecha. That when you find a dead body in between two cities, it says that the elders and the judges have to go out and they do the egla arufah. They decapitate a cow and they ask God to give them atonement for this death, this homicide that occurred. He said, "But anu al mila egla arufah. How are we going to bring the egla arufah? Ala'ir on the city for the city, or al azarot on the courtyards of the temple. The entire community started to cry. They started to wail. In other words, he was saying to them, "How can we, when somebody dies and we don't know who did it, and it's in the middle of the forest, and we have to come and make a huge deal out of it, the loss of a life." He said, "How are we going to do it now? What are we going to do? We have a murder happening right in the Beit HaMikdash. How terrible is that?" But the story continues. Ba'aviv shel tinok, the father of this Kohen who was killed, came. He saw that he was still not dead yet. He's still moving. Amar harehu kaparatchem. He said, "He will be your kapara. He is your atonement. The death of this child will be your atonement because it's going to wake you up to the problem." But you know what? My son is still alive, so the knife is not tameh. You could take the knife out of him, and that means that the knife is not tameh because he didn't die yet. Now, could you imagine a father is thinking that when his son is dying on the ground, he's bleeding, a knife in his heart, and the father says, "Oh, don't worry, my son is still alive, so the knife is still tahor. The knife is still good." So we're going to see lelamircha, to teach you. That shows you that they were more concerned about the purity of the vessels of the sakin, more concerned about the purity of that knife that was going to be used for slaughtering korbanot than they were about the death of somebody. Murder happens in front of them. Okay, it's a murder, but the knife to be tameh. Oh no, we can't let that happen. We better take the knife. So we'll see a little bit more about this. And similarly it says, it says about Menashe, the evil king, who was one of the last kings of Yehuda, that he spilled so much blood that he filled Jerusalem from one end to the other with innocent blood. So in other words, the people had become desensitized to murder. Murder was happening so much. So the Gemara asks the following question: which happened first? Because we have two situations of terrible accidents, on-the-job accidents of Kohanim. The first one was the guy who pushed his friend and he broke his foot. The second one is the murder that happened. So which one happened first? So, which one happened first? If the murder happened first, so it doesn't make any sense. If a murder happened between two Kohanim, because one of them wanted to be able to get to the top of the ramp first, and that didn't convince the rabbis to change to a lottery, why would somebody breaking their foot change the mind of the rabbis? Right? It doesn't make sense. So then we must. So I'm sorry, I skipped. It must be that the breaking of the foot story was first. But if that's the case, that the story of the guy who broke his foot was first, so then why was the story of the murder ever allowed to happen? Since they already instituted the lottery after that guy broke his foot. So why were these two Kohanim racing to the top? The race was not done anymore. So which one happened first? If the murder happened first, then the foot breaking thing couldn't have happened, right? Because we would have said it. Well, if for murder they're not going to change the policy, certainly they would have. Oh, so then the murder must have happened later. But if the murder happened later, that means the foot breaking incident happened first, and it says that after the foot breaking incident they changed the policy. So how could the murder happen? So the Gemara answers, rather what it goes is like this, that really the murder case was first. However, but the rabbis saw this and they said, this is never going to happen again. This is akrai ba'alma. This is just a random, senseless act of violence. Obviously this Kohen is crazy what he did, right? That he killed somebody who got too close. And so, this is not going to happen again. However, but then when they saw that even ordinary people were getting into danger, because you see that the guy broke his foot, okay, the other Kohanim are not going to kill their competitors, but maybe they'll push them. Maybe they could break their foot, We don't know, somebody else could die. So it's not just a random occurrence. There could be a repeat of this, so that's when they banned it. Right? That's when they prohibited it. and they made it a complete lottery. So really the murder happened first. They said that's an isolated incident. It's not going to happen again. When the foot breaking incident happened, they said, we better clamp down on this completely and not allow it anymore. Amar Rabbi Tzadok al malota ulam v'amar rachanu v'erisal shimu harehu omer ki matel halal badma anan al milahavi ala irva o al azarot. So Rabbi Tzadok, when he stood up, he said, it says when you find a dead body, a murder has been committed, you bring the egla arufah. Who are we going to bring it for? The city, the courtyards, what are we going to do? Does Jerusalem ever bring an egla arufah? Does Jerusalem ever bring the decapitated calf? Even if a dead body is found between two cities, and it's closer to Jerusalem, that's what they would do. They would measure it. If it's closer to Jerusalem, the elders of Jerusalem don't go out to do the egla arufah, because we learned asarat varim ne'amru b'Yerushalayim v'zo achat mehem, that there are 10 things stated about Jerusalem, and this is one of them. Einam mevia egla arufah. They don't bring egla arufah. They don't bring the decapitated calf.
Why is that?
It's a gzerat hakatuf. It's because it says it's only in the land that was Yerusha, that was inherited by the Shvatim, that was inherited by the tribes. But Jerusalem was national property. It wasn't owned by any tribe. So therefore, it wasn't subject to Egla Arufah. That's what Rashi says on the side. And moreover, the whole concept of Egla Arufah is when you don't know the murderer. But here we saw the murder happen right in front of us. The only reason why Rabbi Tzadok brought up the issue of Egla Arufah, he wasn't being literal. He knew that Egla Arufah didn't apply to Jerusalem. He knew that it wouldn't apply to this case because we know who the murderer is. He was just trying to show that the Torah is so severe in its treatment of murder. And yet we have a murder right here in the Beit HaMikdash, how terrible that is. It says that the father of the boy came and saw him still alive. And he said, don't worry, my son is still alive. Which shows you that they were more concerned about the purity of vessels than the murder that happened. They asked a question. Is this because murder became commonplace to them? In other words, they always had the same level of reverence for purity in the Beit HaMikdash. It was that their sensitivity to human life went down.
This is second Beit HaMikdash.
This is second Beit HaMikdash. O Dilma, or maybe shefichut damim kedekaima kaima. No, they always had this level of concern for human life. Aval taharat kelim hi dehamira. But purity of vessels has become more strict. In other words, what was it? Is this Tosefta trying to tell us that they became more strict about the purity of vessels? Or is it telling us that they became less sensitive to the loss of life? Tashma, come and listen. From the fact that the Tosefta brings the pasuk, V'gam dam naki shafach Menashe, it brings the case of Menashe committing a lot of murder. Shema mina shefichut damim hu dizal v'tahorat kelim kedekaima kaima. That really it was that murder became too commonplace to them. That's why it brings the pasuk of Menashe. Even though Menashe lived during the first temple, in other words, he set a precedent for people not to take murder that seriously. Okay, another murder. What are we going to do? But purity of vessels. That we have to be careful. So that was because their sense of the sanctity of life had diminished as a result of people like Menashe who were bad. It talks about the Kohen has to change his clothing and take the deshen out. Now remember, there are two things. There's tirumat deshen, which is that every day the Kohen takes a scoop of ashes and he puts it next to the Mizbeach. And then there's hotza'at deshen, which is where that pile next to the Mizbeach becomes very big, they would take it out. So it says he had to change his clothing, v'hotziat deshen, to take out the deshen, to take out the pile. So it says, Shom'ani kederech Yoma Kippurim, sheposhet begdei kodesh v'lovesh begdei chol. That it's just like Yom Kippur, just like on Yom Kippurim, the Kohen has to change his clothes a lot. Here too, he has to change his clothes, because it says upashatet begadav v'lavash begadim achirim. He has to take off his clothes and put on different clothes. So Talmud Lamar, the pasuk says upashatet begadav v'lavash begadim achirim. It emphasizes he took off his clothes and he puts on begadim achirim, other clothes. Makish begadim shelovesh lebegadim sheposhet. Malahalan begdei kodesh, afkan begdei kodesh. It's not that he switches into regular clothes. In other words, you might think that just like the Kohen switches from, let's say, Bigdei Zahav to Bigdei Lavan, to the golden to the white garments, he goes to totally different garments. So the Kohen here, when it says he should take off his clothes, it means he should take off his holy garments, and he should put on regular clothes to take out. He's taking out the trash, right? He's taking out the Atadeshin. He should put on regular clothes. No, it doesn't mean that. It says the word Bigadim twice. Upashat et Bigadav, Vilavash Bigadim Achirim. It says Bigadim twice, meaning both of them are kodesh. In both cases, it's bigdei kodesh. It's holy clothing. So why does it call them other clothing? It means that they were less quality. In other words, he doesn't wear the fanciest clothes. Rashi says either they were made from a lesser material or they were more worn out. But since taking out the deshen is going to be, you're going to get dirty. It's like taking out the garbage. You're going to take out the ashes. You're going to get dirty. So they wore a lesser garment for that. But it was still bigdei kodesh. It was still holy, just lesser. Rabbi Eliezer says from the fact that it says achirim v'hotzi that he puts on different clothing and then he takes out the hotza'at hadeshen. Limed al kohanim ba'alei mumin shekshivrin l'hotzi hadeshen. Rabbi Eliezer says, you know what you see from this? From the fact that he doesn't wear his regular bigdei kehuna, he takes them off and puts on something else. That shows you that even kohanim that are ba'alei mumin, even kohanim who are have a defect in their body and therefore cannot do the avodah are allowed to do hotza'at hadeshen. Why? Because taking out the ashes is not considered an avodah. Oh. Now that seems to be a machloket here because the Tanakama was saying that he does have to wear bigdei kodesh. It is an avodah. Rabbi Eliezer is saying it's not an avodah. That's why he's allowed to do it. Amar Mor, the master said, that he has to wear clothing that is lesser. It's still holy, but it's lesser. Because the Tanat Devei Rabbi Ishmael, as Rabbi Ishmael's yeshiva taught, the Tanat Devei Rabbi Ishmael, begadim shebishil ben k'derad rabo lo yimzok ben koser rabo. As Rabbi Ishmael's yeshiva taught, the clothing that you use to cook in the back is not the clothing that you use to serve your master a cup. In other words, you don't want to see the chef come. If you go to a fancy restaurant, the chef who's all dirty from cooking in the back doesn't bring you the food. A guy dressed in a tuxedo with a bow tie brings the food, right? Right? So the same thing. You don't wear the same clothing to take out the ashes to the trash heap, so to speak, that you use to do the korbanot. Two different levels. Now they both dress nicely, but one dresses more nicely than the other. Amar Reish Lakish says, now remember, we said there were two things that they do with the ashes. Every day the Kohen goes and he takes a scoop of the ashes from the previous day and he puts it next to the mizbeach. And then he starts the service of the day. Only once in a while they took from the pile next to the mizbeach and carried it out. Now there's a machloket between the Tanakama and Rabbi Eliezer. Can a Baal Mum, a Kohen who is disqualified from service in general, take out the ashes? Reish Lakish says they have the same argument about Terumat Hadeshen. Even though you have to go up on the mizbeach to do Terumat Hadeshen, you have to take a scoop of the ashes and put it. Reish Lakish says Rabbi Eliezer would permit a Kohen who is disqualified from every other type of avodah to do it. He would still allow them. However, Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Machloket Batav al Baharama Divrei Kol Avodahi. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, I disagree. They only are talking here about Hotza'at Hadeshen. Only about taking out the ashes, because you don't go on the Mizbeach for that. It's not really an avodah. You're just taking a pile right next to the Mizbeach and taking it out. However, Terumat Hadeshen, everyone agrees. You have to be a qualified Kohen, because you're standing on the Mizbeach. You're doing a real service. How could you say that's not an avodah? So the Gemara says, "My time at the Reish Lakish. What's Reish Lakish's argument? Amar lach." He would say to you, "Isal kadatach avodah hi yesh lecha avodah shekshera b'shnei kelim." He says, "Let's look at the pasuk." The pasuk says, and they're gonna quote the pasuk soon. It's when it talks about taking out the Terumat Hadeshen. It says, "Ve'lavasha kohen midovad u'michnesevad yilbash al bisaro." The kohen should put on his tunic and his pants. And he should take out the deshen. He should take out the ashes. So what does that mean? And that actually is talking about Terumat Hadeshen, right? It says that vehirim et Hadeshen asher tochal et haolah al mizbeach v'samo et al mizbeach. That's talking about putting it next to the mizbeach. In other words, that's Terumat Hadeshen. And Terumat Hadeshen, it says that he's wearing the tunic and the pants. What about the other bigadim? What about the mitznefet, the hat that he has to wear? Right? What about the belt? He doesn't have the turban and he doesn't have the belt. And yet he's able to do it. He says if this is a real avodah, if in other words, taking Terumat Hadeshen is a real avodah, then how come the Kohen doesn't have to wear his full bigdei kehuna? How come he only has to wear two of them according to the pasuk? For Rabbi Yochanan, galei rachmana bechtonet umechnasayim, v'uadin mitznefet ve'avnet. Come on, man. It doesn't mean that he doesn't have to wear all 4 of the begadim. Of course he does. Taking a scoop of the ashes, the Terumat HaDeshen, and putting it next to the Mizbeach every day, that's part of the Avodah. Of course he has to wear all 4 begadim. It's just giving you an example of 2. It's mentioning 2 of them, but obviously he has to wear all of them. So if that's true that it has to, so Umayshnat Hani, so then why does it mention only 2 of them according to Rabbi Yochanan? If it's not telling you that you have to wear less clothing for this service than others, really you always have to wear all 4 if you're a Kohen. So then why does it mention 2? Because Midovad, when it says that he has to wear his tunic, which is made of linen, so mido kemidato. The word mido refers to kemidato. It had to be perfectly tailored to his size. Okay, the Kohen's clothing had to fit. Michnesevad, why does it talk about the pants? Lechidetanya, as it says in the Braita, to tell you that you can't have anything in between the pants and your body. In other words, you can't put on long johns or something under there. Shenevar, as it says, that has to be on his flesh. So what does Rabbi Yochanan say? Why does it mention these 2 garments? Not to tell you that you don't need all 4 garments. Of course you do. It's part of the avodah. However, it wants to tell you that what? That these 2 garments, there's a special halacha taught about each of them. One is to teach you that it has to fit. The other one is to teach you that there can't be anything under it, in between the garment and your body.
This is for Kohen Gadol or for
Kohen Hediot, regular Kohen.
Okay.
Ve'resh Lakish. What about Resh Lakish? Mido kemidato. So where does he get if according to Resh Lakish, remember the reason why it mentions these 2 garments is to tell you that that's all you need for Terumat HaDeshen. You don't need anything else. According to Rabbi Yochanan, no, you need all 4. So it mentions these 2 to teach you a special halacha in each of these 2. Resh Lakish, where does he learn the special halacha? Since he's telling you that you need these 2 garments to be mentioned to tell you that that's all you need to wear. You don't need anything else. So where does he going to learn the halacha that the tunic has to be perfectly sized? Where is he going to learn the halacha that the pants can't have anything in between them and your body? So the answer is that he's going to say mido kemidato midafker rachmana b'lashon mido, from the fact that the Torah suddenly uses the word mido instead of kitonet. It uses a special word, mido, which sounds like midah. And where does he learn that it needs to be that the pants have to be touching your flesh and there can't be any? You can't put on something under it. From the fact that it says al bisaro, on your flesh. So it mentions michnasayim to tell you that all you need to wear are the pants and the tunic. But it mentions them with extra words. It calls the tunic mido instead of kutonto, and it calls the pants, it says al bisaro, they have to be on your flesh, to teach you that they have to be touching your flesh with nothing in between. Not because, so still though, according to Resh Lakish, it mentions these 2 garments because these are the only 2 that you need. You don't need any others. So the Gemara says, Ne'ema katanae, maybe this is itself a machloket tanaim. In other words, the machloket between Rabbi Yochanan and Resh Lakish is, according to Rabbi Eliezer, who's allowing a kohen, who's a balmum, has a defect, to do hotza'at hadeshen, to take the ashes out of the Beit HaMikdash, will he also allow him to take the ashes each day from on top of the Mizbeach and put them next to the Mizbeach? Resh Lakish says yes, he will. Rabbi Yochanan says no, he won't. He doesn't allow that. So the question is, maybe this is a machloket tanaim, because we learned in a Braita al bisaro matal mudamar. It says that the pants have to be on his flesh. Yilbash matal mudamar yilbash lavi mitznefet v'avned laharama divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So it says yilbash again. It says yilbash twice in the psukim, right? So what is it? So because it says v'lavash hakohen midovad umechnesevad yilbash al bisaro. It says twice to put on. So why does it tell you to put on? Twice, to teach you about the 2 garments that are missing. Because in the description it only mentions the tunic and it mentions the pants. It doesn't mention the belt and it doesn't mention the hat. Or the turban. So what does that show you? Why do you need yilbash twice? To show you that you need those other 2 things too. And that seems to support the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said, even though they're not mentioned, you have to wear all 4 begadim because taking that scoop of ashes off the top of the Mizbeach each day is also part of the avodah. Rabbi Dosa says, "Lerabot bigdei kohen gadol b'yom kippurim sheksherin the kohen hediot." Rabbi Dosa says, no. The reason why it says yilbash twice is to teach you that that the bigdei kehuna, the white bigadim that the Kohen Gadol uses on Yom Kippur, he has to leave in the Beit HaMikdash. It says v'hin nicham sham. He has to leave them. Now the question is, what does that mean to leave them? Does it mean that they're put away forever and never used again? Rabbi Dosa says no. A regular Kohen can use them. A Kohen Gadol can't use the same bigadim for another Yom Kippur. It has to be new every year. But a Kohen Hedyot can use them now, according to Rabbi Dosa. That's why you need Yilbash twice. Now, what would the implication be? Now, the Gemara is understanding this, says, why does Rabbi Dosa say that? Because he disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda. He says the Kohen doesn't need to wear all 4 bigadim to do Terumat Hadeshen. He doesn't need to. And that's why he's saying, no, Yilbash is mentioned twice because to teach you something else, to teach you that the Bigdei Kehuna can be used by a regular Kohen in the upcoming year. But really, you don't need all 4 bigadim to do Terumat Hadeshen because it's not part of the avodah. That's how the Gemara is understanding it now. That's the machloka between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Dosa. Amar Rabbi says, Shetei teshuvot b'davar. There are 2 reasons why I disagree with Rabbi Dosa about allowing a regular Kohen to use the leftover clothing of the Kohen Gadol from Yom Kippur. Number 1, Chadad avneto shel Kohen Gadol hu avneto shel Kohen Hedyot. First of all, because I hold that the belt of the Kohen Gadol is not the same as the belt of the Hedyot. Remember, we learned this before. This is a machloket. This is a machloket in general. Whether the belt of the Kohen Gadol is this, in other words, because there's a question about what kind of belt does the Kohen Hedyot wear during the year. Okay?
What is a deal?
A regular Kohen. Standard Kohen. Whether the regular Kohen's belt is the same as the Kohen Gadol's belt of Yom Kippur. So we had a machloket. Some say that what the regular Kohen wears all the time is what the Kohen Gadol wears on Yom Kippur. Others say no. What the regular Kohen wears all the time is something different. It's something special. It's not like what the Kohen Gadol wears on Yom Kippur.
Kohen Gadol wears shatnez on Yom Kippur.
No, because he wears plain. With the white, he wears plain. So the question is, do the regular Kohanim wear plain during the year, or they wear shatnez during the year? If they wear shatnez during the year, the special kind of belt, then that means that the one that the Kohen Gadol wears on Yom Kippur wouldn't be good for them. Right? Because it's pure. So that's what Rabbi is saying. Moreover, you're going to take bigadim that were used for Yom Kippur, for the holiest service of the year, and you're going to use them and for the Kohen Gadol and use them for a lesser Kedusha? How could you do that? So he rejected on 2 counts. Number 1, because he holds that the regular Kohen wears a special belt, not a plain belt, but actually a belt that has shatnez in it during the rest of the year. And so they couldn't use that belt of Yom Kippur of the Kohen Gadol. So that's point number 1. Point number 2 is that you're lowering the Kedusha. So what then does it mean, Yilbash? It can't be telling you that the Kohen Hedyot is allowed to wear the clothing, the bigadim, the vestments of the Kohen Gadol. Rather, lerabot teshahakim. It's telling you that you can use worn out clothing as long as they're not torn. They're still kasher. The regular Kohen all year round doesn't have to wear perfect clothing. It can be worn out a little bit. It's not as shiny as it once was, but it's still kasher unless it gets torn. Vehen nicham sham. So it says that the Kohen Gadol, after his service on Yom Kippur, has to leave the bigadim there. Melamed sheteonin gniza. That teaches you that they have to be put away in storage. Rabbi Dosa omer reuyin hen the Kohen Hedyot. This is the machloket, right? According to Rabbi Dosa, the belt that the Kohen Gadol wears on Yom Kippur is the same as the belt that the Kohen Hedyot wears the rest of the year. Therefore, they're interchangeable, and that a regular Kohen can take the clothing of the Kohen Gadol after Yom Kippur and use it. According to the Tanna Kama, that's not the case. For at least one reason, it can't be done. Either because the belt of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur is not the same belt as the Kohen Hedyot of the rest of the year, or because we don't want to go from a higher Kiddusha to a lower Kiddusha, or both reasons could be applicable. Why then does it say he has to leave it there? Because it means that the Kohen Gadol can never use the same clothing for another Yom Kippur. But that doesn't mean it can't be used. Maybe it could be used by the regular Kohen. Now we're going to conclude the point here. Now isn't this exactly the machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Dosa? How so? How is this the machloket between the two of them? Because Demar Savar Avodahi. Because Rabbi Yehuda is saying that taking the Terumat Hadeshen, taking that scoop of ashes off the top of the Mizbeach and putting it next to the Mizbeach every day is considered an avodah. And since it's considered an avodah, you need all 4 garments to be worn. Omar Savar, and the other one says, Lav avodahi, it's not an avodah. And therefore, what? Therefore, he doesn't need. So he uses the word yilbash in the pasuk to tell you something else. Not that you need all 4 garments. No, Rabbi Dosa says it's literal. You only need 2 garments. Why do you only need 2 garments? Because you don't really need the garments at all. Because it's not really avodah at all. That's why it mentions just wearing a tunic and wearing the pants. But it's really not a complete wearing of the Bigdei Kehuna, because it's not really an avodah according to Rabbi Dosa. So he takes the pasuk of Yilbash not to teach you that you need the other 2 bigadim, not to teach you need the other 2 garments, but to teach you something totally different about the bigadim of Yom Kippur being used by a regular Kohen the rest of the year. So what does that show you, though? This machloket shows you that supports the idea that according to Rabbi Yochanan would agree with Rabbi Yehuda, that the Terumat Hadeshen is definitely a service. According to Reish Lakish, he would say, no, I agree with Rabbi Dosa that it's not a service. Right?
What do you think, Rabbi? What do you think?
I don't know. Who am I? Right, so now, but the Gemara says no. So now the Gemara says, concluding that not true. Rabbi Yochanan will tell you that no, everybody in this Braita agrees that Terumat Hadeshen is part of the avodah. And this is what they're really arguing about. It's not a question of whether the Kohen has to wear the 4 bigadim in order to do Terumat Hadeshen. Whether Terumat Hadeshen is really a service. It's definitely a service. He definitely needs to. The only question is whether you need the pasuk to teach you that. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you need a pasuk to teach you that Terumat Hadeshen is an avodah, and that it requires all 4 bigadim of the Kohen to be worn. And that's why you need the pasuk yilbash. You need the word lavash to be mentioned twice, to emphasize that he needs all 4 bigadim. However, according to Rabbi Dosa, you don't need a pasuk for that. That's obvious. It's obvious, not because it's not true, but because it's obvious. And therefore he uses the pasuk of yilbash, the extra word, to teach you something different. But really, Rabbi Yochanan will tell you, everybody agrees. Terumat Hadeshen is definitely an avodah. Terumat Hadeshen definitely requires all 4 bigadim, and even according to Rabbi Eliezer, who allows the taking out of the deshen, the taking out of the ashes by a disqualified kohen, by a defective kohen, a balmum, he will not allow the Terumat Hadeshen for the kohen to go up on the mizbeach and take that scoop if he's a balmum. That's unlike Reish Lakish, but that's how the Gemara defends, is obviously taking up the position of Rabbi Yochanan, because they're defending it from the standpoint of Rabbi Yochanan here.